Welcome back, everyone, to another episode. Today, we are speaking with Stefanie Santos McLeese. Stephanie is the co
Hi.
founder, brand strategist at S Collective Brand Strategy and Identity, and CEO, owner, founder of Santos McLeese PR and Brand Strategy. She delivers counsel and guidance to in house executive corporate communications leaders during times of change, transition, and evolution. Stephanie, welcome to the show.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me. Yes, all the things.
Yeah, quite a bit, quite a bit. And I'm so happy to have you with us. As folks, we will be speaking about mastering brand success with the four brand dimensions. And Stephanie's going to take us through those. But before we get into that conversation, Stephanie, tell us a little bit about you.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for having me. It's a real pleasure to be here. Uh, that's always it's always a fun question, and it's coming, and you're like, how do I answer that? I mean, in a nutshell, Enrique, I'm a Tejana, born and raised, now doing life in Central Illinois. I was a brand strategist, corporate communications consultant, and really just trying to have impact. I'm the daughter of immigrants, migrant field workers, and first gen college graduate, and never really knew what I'd end up doing career wise. I just knew that I had the parents that said, you got to go to school, you got to go to school, you got to get an education. And 20 years post graduation from the great Tarleton State University in Stephenville, Texas, um, I'm practicing independently. I spent 8 years in corporate communications roles in the Dallas market first, really cutting my teeth, learning from some incredible mentors in global brands, within global brands, corporate communications roles, and knew I wanted to have some flexibility as we were getting ready to start our family. To be honest, I mean that's really how this independent practice world started. Felt like it could offer some balance to our family. And so after 8 years of corporate communications work, um, I I started down this path of independent work. I started with a little account with the Catholic Diocese of Dallas, and haven't looked back. And it's been a blessing. It's been a blessing.
And it's wonderful to hear. Now, you mentioned your parents, and quickly I'll bring them in because it's very important for folks to understand that wherever we get, it's been at
Hmm.
the backs and the
On the
efforts and
shoulders.
the
Hmm.
work and the shoulders of our parents. And so
Totally.
you mentioned, hey, being first gen college. Well,
Yeah.
both of them got GEDs,
Hmm.
and
That's
and
true.
your father went into the army,
Yeah.
and so you talk about setting a trend for your children to follow and excel and exceed. I believe they did that. And so I congratulate them here on the
Thank
show.
you.
And so you'll share that with them, I'm sure. But we're talking about brand, and you got into this area, this genre of work that you
Hmm.
really didn't understand to say, hey, okay, how far
No.
am I going to go? But there's a lot of people that don't really understand what brand is. And so
Right.
I wanted you to take us through what brand is from your perspective.
The first thing I will say is I appreciate you teeing that up for me. But you did mention, you threw my parents out there, and I want to say, um, one of the things that because this ties into brand. We talk about authentic brand identity. That's what I do, and we can't separate our story from our brand if we're going to wear it organically, naturally, authentically, in a believable way, in an inspirational way that our teams want to follow. So, um, we just wrapped up with graduation season here in the spring. And every graduation card, I wrote a note and I said the same thing to all the graduates. I said, if you want to go far, never forget where you came from. Um, and I think that's important. And it's interesting because we work with executives who through we talked about times of mergers and M&As, evolution, a brand, the a restructure or executive leadership restructure, that kind of thing. And so focused on, we have three centers of intelligence: the head, the heart, and the gut. And executives, obviously, we lead with the head. But when we start leading with the heart center of intelligence, and we open ourselves up to understanding ourselves and our own unique, authentic brand and what we bring through our own zone of genius. If anybody's familiar with the Big Leap model and principles, that's when we really start to inspire teams. And a brand, at the end of the day, is what people say about you when you're not in the room. I think we've heard, if you anybody really follows branding and pays attention to some of the um, the most popular definitions of a brand, that's Jeff Bezos from Amazon. What people say about you when you're not in the room. Um, One of my great brand mentors early in my career taught me that a brand is the perceptions you own and the promise you make. The perceptions you own and the promise you make. What people can expect from you when you show up.
And that's so important to say now. As you was talking, you mentioned what people say when you're not in the room.
Mm-hmm.
I've often refer that as reputation, and I've often said that brand is the imprint you left on a heart when
Oh,
you
I
left.
love that.
And
Yeah,
so, because it is branding, you put you put a stamp on it.
totally.
But
Absolutely.
it's so important to even just to understand that people will talk.
Yes.
And you have to know that. And so
Yes.
if you are a service provider or you
Yes.
are an executive, a business owner,
Mm-hmm.
people are going to talk, and oftentimes you think that your brand is this logo,
Oh,
right?
oh
and
my goodness.
they're
Yes.
going to gravitate to the logo. Well, they'll gravitate away from the logo if you have anything to do with it, right? So
Right. Well, I was going to, and to piggyback that sentiment, what I like to say is every touch point with your stakeholders, your audiences, whether it's employees, colleagues, potential employers, is either brand diminishing or brand reinforcing. It's one or the other. So you talk about that imprint on the heart. Um, it's either brand reinforcing or brand diminishing. So whether they're going to your social channels, your website, they're having an in-person interaction, um, a letter. So often we're crafting a whole corporate communications or a communications plan around, let's say, an acquisition, and you've got employees that are being acquired from another company, you've got existing employees, and you've got people worried about, first thing people think about during an M&A is job security, what's going to happen. And so every piece of communication in that process is going to cause people to think, do, or feel something. And that's what I tell my clients. Your every brand touch point will either be brand reinforcing or brand diminishing. So we got to know what the brand is, whether that's an executive brand, a personal brand, a corporate brand. Those four brand dimensions, which I know we're going to get into, um, are sort of universal, whether you're talking about a corporate brand or an individual brand. But they have to be intentional, and that's where you start to see some overlap between brand strategy and conscious communication, because what you communicate should evoke something very intentional from your audiences. And unless you know what your brand is, you don't know what you're trying to evoke. You want your audiences to think, do, or feel something very specific, particularly as a leader, because those your teams are looking to you, your colleagues are looking to you for guidance and leadership, particularly in the work that I do during times of change, um, for clarity, inspiration, information. And so every touch point has to be brand reinforcing, and it has to be super intentional to have those audiences think, do, or feel something that's going to um, ultimately, at the end of the day, and this is kind of really bringing it back to the business, but it's going to impact the bottom line. If you have a workforce that is clear on what's happening, they're informed, they're engaged, they're inspired, they're going to be able to continue to focus on work and what they're supposed to be doing. If they're distracted with messaging that is confusing or doesn't tell a complete story, leaves the audience with more questions than answers, then you start to see what I call below the line behaviors. So people disengaging, engaging in gossip, those kinds of things. We want to keep people above the line. That's a whole nother talk probably about commitments of conscious leaders. But yeah, You want your audiences to think, do, or feel something every time they have a touch point with you as a leader, as a brand, with your authentic brand, and you want it to be brand reinforcing, because if it's not, it's brand diminishing. There's no gray.
That's very true. Now, folks, stay above the line. Come on, get right. Stay above the
I
line.
like it.
But you mentioned something about the brand dimension. I wanted to ask you
Yeah.
about those, and then we'll break those down individually. But what are the four brand dimensions necessary to owning an authentic brand identity?
I'll list them for you, right? And then we can break them down, like you said. So, character, community purpose, emotional benefit, and environmental experience. So, character, community purpose, and emotional benefit, and environmental experience.
All right, now let's start with character. Can you elaborate on the character dimension?
Yeah, and that's probably almost the most straightforward. When we think about character, it's really just that spirit that you bring to the room, the energy that you show up with. It's the natural and authentic way that you feel comfortable showing up in the world. One of the things that we talk to executives about all the time who are on the brink of overwhelm and burnout is this heavy persona that they think they have to carry as an executive. Um, if you've ever watched, I'm going to make a reference to a documentary here, Dolly Parton's documentary. Um, one of the women who's talking about Dolly talks about this commitment that she had to this persona, and how after so long she couldn't let that persona go, because you almost feel this obligation to this commitment to this persona that got you so far. And Dolly carried it well. She carried it well. She executed it well, and she never has let go of that persona. Um, Executives, I mean, that's she's Dolly's. She's living in Dolly's world. Executives, I think, as a culture, as a society, we sort of have this picture of what we think executives look like, and how they should behave, how they should speak, and it really is interesting when you start to think about what that is and what is natural and authentic to us as humans, as people. How big of a stretch, how big of a gap, how big of a difference is there between how you're showing up naturally and authentically in your day to day life versus how you show up when you walk through the front door of your building or when people walk through your office? It should not be vastly different. It should not be vastly different. Your character, the character dimension is your natural spirit, your natural energy. And that that can look lots of different ways. It could include a sense of generosity, openness, um, collaboration, relentlessness, and how you hustle and you bring this vibe, or is it a little bit more of a calming energy? It's not, it doesn't look or feel any one way for, you know overarchingly. It's what's authentic and natural to you, how you show up. Your character dimension is, what I would say, is the aspect that promotes engagement, participation. It facilitates connections that bring out the best in people, because you can do that lots of different ways. There are lots of different approaches to that. And the best approach is going to be whatever is authentic for that leader. So it could look very different from leader to leader, but that is what we're bringing to the table when we talk about character, the character dimension of a brand.
It's interesting you mentioned how someone thinks that that position
Mhm.
requires what that requires. I spent 2 years at a company where I was part of the executive team as an executive advisor.
Okay.
I was the only one that wore a suit every day for 2 years.
Ah, interesting.
Everybody else wore casual clothing.
Sure.
And I
Sure.
had a perception or I had a thought of what an executive should look like,
Mhm.
but I didn't let the current environment change my character. And
Mhm.
so when we would go places, it was evident that they would gravitate towards me first because they
Mhm.
also thought that executives should look a certain way. And I
Yep.
would often have to say, no, that's the CEO.
Well, and don't get me wrong, there is a lot of science and I think truth to how we look there's impact there mentally, psychologically, when we put ourselves together a certain way. And actually, if you would like, look, we can just jump on over to the environmental dimension because that's a good segue. I know that's not the order I listed them in, but it's a good segue. You want to do that?
Yeah, we could do that.
Because the environmental experience is the physical manifestation of the brand. So we are talking about it's often, and it's a good segue too because it's a reflection of your character dimension. So the color palette you wear, the style of clothing, your hairstyle, your jewelry, your accessories, how you design your office space. Um, all of those things embody the environmental brand dimension. So that is basically it's the visual environmental experience is what sends signals to everyone who engages with you about the kind of personality they can expect and the kind of character that you aim to exemplify. So I like to say that my environmental experience is polished and playful. My character is polished and playful. I like to integrate play and laughter and a sense of just a joyful spirit in the workplace. We can talk more about that later, but just some of the work that I do with my partner, where we're working on helping folks identify those authentic brand dimensions and define those a little bit more. Oftentimes, those are found when we let ourselves play a little bit. You think about your inner child, your youth, and when you were a kid, right? You were Superman. You could conquer the world. You were going to be anything. You were going to do anything, and then at some point, these self-limiting beliefs started to creep in because of, whether it was early in your childhood through, the folks who raised you, whoever that was, teachers, those formative years. Maybe it's workplace trauma, but you started to have this what we call upper limiting belief, upper limiting problem. Again, that gets back to big leap and zone of genius and those things. And so when we let ourselves play a little bit and experience the possibilities, that comes out in your character and your spirit, the energy you bring, that's inspiring, and you let that show through how you dress, how you decorate your space, maybe the kind of car you drive, the way that it even has a visual, even what I say environmental experience. I think there's overlap there too. And you mentioned logos earlier. It's part of that. You start to get into that visual identity aspect as well. So whether you're in my office or you're in my website, there should be a seamlessness in terms of how it looks, how it feels, how it plays, and the interplay there between, the space I create, whether it's physically, we're having coffee, you're coming in my office, or you're looking at my website. There's going to be an environmental experience there that's consistent wherever you go.
Absolutely. Now, you mentioned how the colors and what you wear and how authentic you are, even in those. And no matter if I'm wearing a suit or a t-shirt for the podcast, I'm a joker at heart. So there's going to be a lot of laughing going on because it's just witty of me as I
Yeah.
was growing up. You either had to be laughing or crying, and I rather
Yeah.
be laughing through my childhood. But
That's right.
you mentioned environmental experience, which I want to tie into, and just as we rearrange some things, the emotional benefit piece of brands, because we're talking about how you're dressing, how you're presenting yourself. It
Hmm.
causes an emotional reaction as well as a intellectual reaction when you see somebody say, "Oh,
Oh
that's got to
yeah.
be the executive," right?
Yeah.
And many times I have to, bust their emotion and say, "No, that was that one over there." But what is emotional benefit as it relates to brand?
Yeah, there's a trigger there. You're right. There's a lot of interplay there. The emotional benefit of your brand is the space that you open. This is the space you open in the hearts and minds of all who engage with you. It says it's really the emotional intelligence aspect of your brand. So for so long we talked about communication skills and these things that would used to be categorized as soft skills. And really today, if you talk to any headhunter, they're talking about EQ, because they want people who can read nonverbals, who can read a room, who can understand employees who are on the brink of overwhelm and burnout, who understand that they have a personal situation that they're working through that's going to impact the quality of work, and it might be better for them to take some time or whatever it might be. But that emotional benefit is the space that you create for colleagues, for team members, partners, to just show up in their most authentic states, because when people are operating in their most authentic state, they're more likely to get to that zone of excellence, to get to that zone of genius, to do to perform at their highest optimum level, when they're in their most authentic state. So what you're doing in terms of the emotional benefit is creating space for people to bring their whole selves, and acknowledge where that interplay is between, what's happening with them as a human, not just a robot or a cog in the wheel, right, at work, but what's happening with them as a human, and how to create an opportunity for them to clear whatever it is they might need to clear in order to get them focused at the task at hand. Again, it's we want to relate to people on a human level, certainly because it's the right thing to do, but also I take this back to the business side. You're not going to get the most out of people if they're stuck in their own head, if they've got other things happening. So when you create that emotional space for people to um, to be who they need to be. Let me give you a real life example. I did this not too long ago with a client. We were we were in a pretty intense whiteboarding session where we were trying to get through the nitty gritty of a transition. And this leader was becoming increasingly frustrated, thinking about all the what ifs and the roadblocks and the challenges. And we're mapping and we're talking. And I said, I just took a deep breath and I said, why don't we, would you be comfortable taking a walk around the block? Let's just go outside for a minute. We can continue the conversation, but how about we just walk and talk? And he said, I think that would be good. I think that'd be good. And so we just went outside. We went outside. And so naturally, as you're sort of transitioning through the halls and stuff, you sort of, you kind of take a step back from the confidentiality of what we were discussing. And we get outside and we sort of pick it back up. And then it becomes a little bit more of I'm just almost listening, almost therapist mode, if you will. I said nothing. I really didn't say anything. I just created this opportunity for him to really talk about the concern here on the people and the impact that this change was going to have. And so that emotional turmoil going on inside of him was clouding his ability to think clearly about what we needed to do here to map out this communications plan for what was going to go on. And so I didn't have to say much. He just needed to have that opportunity to sort of step away from, you know, the the weight of what we were discussing in that moment, to clear it, to get it out, to move it through his body, and take that breath. And there's just something about being outside. And we kind of made our way around the building, up and down the street. We came back in. I said, "You ready?" I was like, "Do you ready? Should we try and hit it again? Let's see what we can do here." He's like, I think we're good." Came back inside, and it was just a completely different tone. And we were able to get through what we needed to get through, and really pretty quickly after that. Had we stayed in that room, I think we would have continued to just spin our wheels and spin our wheels and spin our wheels. But we stepped away. I created that space, the emotional benefit of working with me, I guess you could say. I recognized what was happening. We needed to step away. We came back and we did what we needed to do. And that's the kind of thing that is emotional benefit. It's the emotional space that you open for people to be human. And at the end of the day, once again, the impact on what you're able to do professionally and on the business side and crank out and get done, um, it improves. It's better when you create that space for people to get through that aspect of what they're trying to also do at work.
Yes, and it's important to be able to see when that is required and
Yeah.
implement. So you was wise enough to identify that and said maybe it's the space. Let's go somewhere else and open up the avenue for someone to be a little more clear. It's amazing what
Yeah.
outside does, right? Outside does wonders. Believe me, especially when trying to make those individual impacts. And some of branding is impact to individuals, but there's also community impact or community aspect of branding. You have mentioned one of the four to be
Mhm.
community purpose. So let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, community purpose is, oh, I say that's the heart behind the hustle. It's just that simple. It's the reason that you get up in the morning. It's why you believe that you matter in this world, and showing up every day is important. It's the mission that you've been set on. Um, it's, community purpose is, um, it's the filter through which you make decisions about the kind of job opportunities that you might explore or want to attract, the kinds of business partners you would consider working with. It's ultimately your why. What I say is, like, for example, for me, I never set out to have a niche in my portfolio, and I wouldn't say that I do exclusively. Um, but if you look at my client roster, there's a lot of higher ed and there's a lot of ag. And for me, that goes back to my personal story and my personal brand of being a first gen college graduate, parents who were migrant field workers. And for me, there's just this sort of full circle experience of being able to um, create opportunities, help support business strategy through the lens of communication and brand, to bring more students into colleges and universities, to almost honor my parents' journey as migrant field workers, children. They were children. And now here I am at a decision making table where I've got one client out of South America who I'm helping grow their North American market share. And my parents were picking fruits and vegetables in the fields. And so for me, my purpose is creating, um, opportunities for people to, to experience college, and to, like I said, honor my parents' journey a little bit. And not something I intentionally set out to do, but it's become my purpose, I think.
And I think it's a little more than a little bit, but that's all right. You can say that. But we know that the impact, actual, from what your parents came to what you're doing, they must be, plumb proud of you, and
Well,
just
thank
looking
you.
at you and saying, "Wow." I just saw a video the other day. It was a man. He was just bawling, crying about his daughter graduating. And he said, "I just can't
Mm-hmm.
believe that that came from me." And,
Oh,
and,
that's
so
beautiful.
I'm sure that they feel the same. Now, thank you for sharing all of that on branding. And I know that apart from what you do with your clients, you have other things going on that I've also noticed. So take a little bit of time to tell us what you have coming up, and how can the listener or viewer get a hold of you if they want the type of services that you provide.
Sure. Well, I mean, I definitely work as an extension of an in-house corporate communications team really well. That's kind of my bread and butter uh, during times of, transition, change, evolution. Um, but I also I facilitate workshops and trainings. I actually have, working with the Major League Baseball Players Alumni Association this summer. We're doing a two-part workshop series for these MLB players who are either about to retire or post 5 years of retirement, and really going to walk them through essentially what we talked about here today, and help them start to think through what it means to own that authentic brand identity with depth, far beyond, as you said, logos, color palettes, social media presence, so that they can create a very ownable, authentic brand as they transition into that next phase of life. So executives and leaders who are interested in exploring that, those would be the kinds of folks that I would work with as well. And then really my heart and passion as I move forward, really is in the work I'm doing with my partner Yancy Wright at Casa Alterna Vida in Puerto Rico. We work with executives there who are on the brink of overwhelm and burnout and helping them find that authentic brand. We started to consider, what if we could catch people much earlier in their career before they get to this point? So we really have a focus on actually working with students. Um, students who are getting ready to graduate, seniors or grad students, middle level management, people who are sort of considering what comes next. But really, those students, to be perfectly honest, we love working with universities, folks who are working with those first gen students in particular, or business students who are emerging leaders and want to explore this kind of heart centered leadership, this kind of work, really get to understand and define their brand early in their careers so that they can pursue opportunities with companies and organizations and career paths that are in alignment with their natural, authentic self and the brand that feels comfortable showing up in every single day. So that, right, there's that old saying that if you love what you do, you never work a day in your life. So and that's what our heart that's where my heart is. And so if folks want to get in touch with me, santosmcleese.com, is my website. I actually have a direct link to my calendar where you can book a half-hour consultation. Um, Certainly on LinkedIn as well is another great place to find me. And I'd love to have this conversation with anybody who's interested in exploring this kind of work, where my heart's at.
Absolutely. And now, folks, we're going to have all of that information as part of the show notes and video. And definitely put Arte Navidad out of Rio Grande, Puerto Rico, on there so you to get a eyes view on what they're doing out of there. Now, I want to remind everyone that today's episode is sponsored by Fantail Services and Superpass, which are powering our website and app. Southern Sweet and Sassy Coffee, The Outlier Project, and Duco. So, if you've enjoyed this episode and learned something interesting about the topic covered today, make sure to subscribe and let us know by leaving a comment. And we're always looking for new ideas and guests that we can add to our show. So, if you know someone or have a topic that you would like featured on the podcast or want to sponsor our show, we'd love to hear about it by emailing us at triadleadershipsolutions@gmail.com. And this podcast is brought to you by StreamYard, a browser based tool that lets you live stream to any platform and record podcasts in studio quality. And we're using it to record this podcast. Be sure to tune in next week for another episode where we dissect leadership from another angle. And as we like to end the show, success to you.